just need an example. If Jesus is only an example to live by, then all you need to do is, tie up your boots a little tighter and do better. But the sacrifice of Jesus on the cross wasn't because Jesus came to show us how to live. It was to live the life we couldn't live. And on that basis, like I said before, you're saved by works, but it's Jesus's work. It's not yours.
I want to talk about, I don't know what you call it, but I wanted to bring this up earlier when we were talking about all the other stuff, all the reform.
Mm-hmm.
What is it? Christian? What? Jeremy told me about this.
The Reformers, yes. The Reformation.
You have some kind of reform. Am I wrong?
Yeah, so I'm part of kind of a tradition of Protestant Christianity that would typically be referred to as Reformed, or capital R Reformed. And so what that is it's going back to the Protestant Reformation. So individuals like Luther and Calvin and Zwingli and Melanchthon, who were there were proto-reformers. There were individuals prior to that, John Huss and John Wycliffe. And what that period of time is in the Protestant Reformation it was a number of individuals who were looking at the church around them, and they were saying, there have been these traditions that have developed, these accretions over time, and we need to get back to the gospel. We need to get back to primitive Christianity. There was a lot of things that had taken place in the Middle Ages, a lot of corruption within the church hierarchy. There were a number of popes who basically bought themselves into the position of the papacy and had children out of wedlock and all these sorts of things. It was a little bit of a crazy time. And there was what kind of spawned that what we typically mark as the beginning of the Protestant Reformation is 1517, when Martin Luther nails his 95 Theses to the chapel door of the Castle Church in Wittenberg, Germany. So that's kind of this placeholder marker as the beginning of the Reformation. In a historical sense, what Luther did wasn't actually all that odd. Nowadays, the equivalent of going to a football game now in Wittenberg, Germany in the 16th century was that one theologian would put up their debate challenge on the door, and another theologian would take it up, and they'd go to the pub and they would debate. They'd go back and forth. And so in a very practical sense, Luther wasn't doing, this wasn't an act of vandalism by nailing something to a door. And he actually could have very well pasted it, but the nailing and the hammer makes a good image. But what he was doing was he was challenging the church, and particularly the Pope's authority, to forgive sins in what are referred to as indulgences. So there's this idea, I'll try not to go into too much detail about the treasury of merit, but the idea is that you can, by giving money to the church, buy forgiveness of sins to get yourselves so many years off of purgatory. So in this particular time, there was a lot of corruption in that they were trying to rebuild St. Peter's Cathedral in Rome. And one of the ways they did this was that they sent these individuals out who were basically salesmen. And there was a saying, when a coin in the coffer rings, a soul from purgatory springs. And the idea was that, you give your money and you can get either your family members who have passed away or maybe you in the future time off of purgatory. And so Luther is looking at this and he's seeing people being taken advantage of. At this point, he's a professor, he's teaching at the seminary, but he's also a minister. He's a priest in the church in Wittenberg. And he sees this, and he's seeing this as people who don't really have the means to give being taken advantage of for the purpose of rebuilding the St. Peter's in Rome. And so he writes up these theses, and part and parcel to it is that he's saying, if the Pope has the authority to forgive sins, why doesn't he just do it? If he can pull people out of purgatory by the grace and loving kindness that he possesses, Why doesn't he just do it? Why do you have to pay him? Now, that's a kind of an oversimplification of the 95 articulations of what he puts, but that's a big part of it. And this gets him in trouble. It gets him in trouble because he's really pushing against.
It's making sense.
I think that's part of it. And also, he was at a very advantageous time. The printing press had just taken off. So it's not that there weren't other people who were challenging the Pope's authority or the magisterium's ability, but because people then take his writings and they print them and through technology are able to get this out, and it's just, it catches wildfire. Now, all of a sudden, Luther's teachings are all over Europe. And so the availability of the technological advancement aids the change and the questioning and all of these things. Well, so Luther is kind of championed with starting some of this. And then that proceeds into more and more. And even the questioning of, okay, at the time, the Bible is primarily read in Latin. It's not widely available in the vernacular of the people. And so Luther endeavors to translate the Bible into German, into the language that people can read. And this is also seen as controversial because the laity are not seen as being able to properly interpret the Word of God. You need kind of the intermediaries of the priests and the powers that be to tell you exactly what's going on.